Did you know there used to be a beer called Watney's Red Barrel? For a while, this pint was so popular it practically defined a whole era of British nights out. Then, almost as suddenly as it rose, it vanished from the taps, like an old friend you hadn't realized was gone. In today's video, we're looking back at 5 classic UK beers, plus a few honourable mentions. These weren't just drinks, they were part of our social fabric. Each one tells a story about changing tastes, lost breweries, and how Britain's drinking culture evolved. So if you remember downing a pint of these at the local after work, or cracking one open with mates during a big match, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's take a proper trip down memory lane together. There was a time when you couldn't step into a pub without spotting that bold red pump handle, Watney's Red Barrel, on full display. Brewed by Watney, Coman, Reed in London, it became the symbol of keg beer in the 1960s and 70s. This wasn't just a pint. It was a statement that British beer was going modern. The story began back in the 1930s, but Red Barrel really took off after World War II. It was one of the first beers in Britain to be pasteurized and kegged, which meant it lasted longer and could be served almost anywhere. Seaside resorts, working men's clubs, even factory canteens. Suddenly, beer wasn't just local, it was national. As for the taste, well, it divided opinion. Malty, a touch sweet, smooth to the point of being flat. It was designed for consistency, not complexity. Easy to drink, unchallenging, reliable. The kind of pint you'd sip after a shift or during a night at the dance hall. Its cheeky adverts and iconic Red Barrel logo made it instantly recognizable, whether you were in Manchester or Margate. But the very things that made it successful eventually worked against it. By the early 1970s, traditionalists were pushing back. In fact, CAMRA, the Campaign for Real Ale, was founded in 1971, largely in response to beers like Red Barrel. Drinkers began craving flavor, craftsmanship, and individuality, not mass-produced sameness. By the late 70s, Red Barrel was being phased out in favor of Watney's Special, a reformulated attempt to win people back. It never really caught on. Before long, the pumps were gone. Today, Red Barrel survives mostly in memory of smoky pubs, sticky floors, and friends laughing under buzzing fluorescent lights. It wasn't the fanciest beer, but it was a fixture, a dependable pint that marked a turning point in British brewing. A double diamond works wonders. If you were watching TV in the 60s or 70s, you heard that slogan more times than you can count. Brewed in Burton-upon-Trent by Allsops, later Ind Coop, Double Diamond became one of the UK's best-selling beers. Its roots go back to the late 19th century, but by the 1950s, it had found its home as a keg beer. Light amber in color, softly carbonated, with a sweet, buttery edge. It wasn't a bold pale ale in the modern sense, but that gentle, smooth character made it a crowd pleaser. You didn't chug a Double Diamond, you sipped it with a bit of pride. It appealed across the board, the aspirational office worker in his clean shirt, the working man out with his mates, even families celebrating at weddings and banquets. The advertising was slick, modern, cosmopolitan. It helped the beer feel bigger than life, and for a time it really was. But as Britain moved into the 80s, tastes shifted. Lager surged ahead, cask ales had a revival, and Double Diamond suddenly looked dated. What had once felt smooth and sophisticated now seemed bland. By the 2000s, you'd be hard-pressed to find it anywhere but a few stubborn pubs. Eventually, it disappeared altogether. Still, for those who knew it, just hearing the slogan can bring it all rushing back. Cigarette smoke on wool coats, jukeboxes humming in the corner, the clink of pint glasses in crowded pubs. Double Diamond didn't just work wonders, it worked its way into the heart of a generation. If you grew up in Sussex or Surrey, the name King and Barnes probably rings a bell. And if you were lucky enough to taste their old ale, you'll know it wasn't just a pint, it was like a warm hug in a glass. Brewed in Horsham, this dark, full-bodied ale had a loyal following, deep chestnut in color with notes of treacle, toasted malt, and a gentle roasted bitterness. It was sweet without being cloying, finishing dry and balanced. It was the sort of beer you drank slowly, savoring every sip. Old ale wasn't trendy or flashy. It was traditional, comforting, the pint you'd order in a quiet corner after a long Sunday walk across the South Downs. It paired beautifully with simple pleasures, pork pies, a roaring fire, and a good chat with friends. King and Barnes was a family-run brewery with roots stretching back to the 1800s, and Old Ale was one of its crowning achievements. For the people of Horsham, it wasn't just a drink, it was part of the town's identity. But like many regional breweries, it couldn't hold out forever. In 2000, King and Barnes was sold to Hall and Woodhouse, and the Horsham brewery was closed. Just like that, Old Ale was gone. Some beers with similar names cropped up later, but locals knew the difference. It wasn't the same. For many in the south of England, its loss was more than just the disappearance of a beer. It was the loss of a cultural landmark, a quiet anchor in a world that was changing fast. Ask anyone who remembers it, and you'll likely see a smile tinged with sadness. Because some beers don't just vanish from pubs, they vanish from our daily rituals, leaving only memory in their place. For Sheffield, and much of the working-class north, Stone's Bitter wasn't just a pint, it was pride in a glass. Brewed at the Cannon Brewery since 1948, it grew from a local favourite into a national powerhouse during the 70s and 80s. This was the beer of miners, steelworkers, and anyone who'd earned their drink after a hard shift. Golden and clean, with a crisp, lightly malty flavour and a dry, subtle finish. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Stone's was made for rounds, pint after pint, the perfect backdrop for darts, banter and laughter. It wasn't the beer you ordered to impress anyone. It was the beer you ordered because it felt like home. Chances are it was the pint your dad drank, the one that stood proudly on every bar across South Yorkshire. You'd find it in corner pubs, sports clubs, canteens, everywhere hard-working people gathered to unwind. By the 1980s, Stone's Bitter had gone national, thanks to its acquisition by Bass. For a while, it was one of the best-selling bitters in the country. But with the growth came compromise. Ownership changed, brewing shifted, and locals swore the taste wasn't what it used to be. The decline was sharp. Cannon Brewery in Sheffield shut its doors in 1999, and though the brand limped along, the beloved cask version was discontinued in 2011. What was left was a shell of its former self. Cans on supermarket shelves, stripped of the soul that made it special. For those who remember it in its prime, Stone's Bitter is forever tied to a sense of place, Sheffield grit, camaraderie, and community. It wasn't just a drink, it was part of the North's identity. For decades, Whitbread Pale Ale was the dependable pint that never shouted for attention, but was always there when you needed it. It wasn't bold, it wasn't heavy, it was simple, familiar, and woven into the daily lives of countless working-class families across Britain. Brewed by Whitbread, one of the biggest names in British beer, it was a staple in pubs and homes from the mid-20th century through the 1980s. Pale gold in colour, lightly malty, crisp, and just a touch bitter, it was what we'd now call a session beer. The kind of pint you could drink without fuss, refreshing and easygoing. For many, it was the background pint of life, a bottle with Dad on a Saturday afternoon while mending the shed, or the classic light and bitter combo ordered by uncles at the pub. Bottled versions lined shop shelves, tucked away in kitchen cupboards, and appeared at weddings, street parties, and factory lunches alike. But that very simplicity eventually worked against it. By the 1980s, beer culture was shifting. Drinkers were chasing bigger, bolder flavors, or going the opposite way with flashy lagers. Bottled pale ales began to look dated. Whitbread itself was swept up in a wave of mergers, and before long, pale ale was quietly retired, slipping away without much fanfare. Ask anyone who remembers it, though, and they'll tell you it was more than just another pint. It was routine, reliable, part of the rhythm of daily life. Its absence today feels like another reminder of how those simpler, slower times have faded into history. Not every lost beer can get the full spotlight, but a few more deserve a nod. Courage Imperial Russian Stout, once brewed for the Tsars themselves, gone by the 1990s. Charrington Toby Ale, famous for its Toby jug label, a proper London classic. Younger's No. 3, a hearty Scottish strong ale, quietly withdrawn over time. Whitbread Light Ale, a lunchtime staple, often paired with a bitter down at the pub. Each one might not be around anymore, but they still live on in memory, a reminder of just how diverse and characterful Britain's beer scene once was. And that wraps up our journey through Britain's vanished beers. Each of these pints tells a story, not just of brewing, but of changing tastes, lost traditions, and the communities that once gathered around them. If hearing these names brought back a memory, the smell of cigarette smoke in a crowded pub, the clink of pint glasses at a wedding, or the comfort of a bottle shared at home, then you know these beers were more than just drinks. They were part of our lives, our rituals, and our culture. If you enjoyed this nostalgic trip, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share your own memories in the comments below. Which of these lost pints do you remember best? Or maybe there's another brew you'd love to see mentioned in a future video. Cheers for joining me, and until next time, here's to the beers that made Britain buzz.